Hi ladies and gents, this is lesson 6 in our series of lessons for an inspector calls, and we are looking today at the end of Act 3. We are going to complete and analyse Act 3 from pages 63 to 72, or if you're in 10XB, pages 213 to 220. And we are also going to discuss the character of Eva Smith. So, ideas that I want you to think about first of all. And obviously you are going to complete work in your book, and you are also going to complete annotations in your text. But we're going to start with some work in your book today. So we never get to see Eva Smith on stage, but we learn a great deal about her from the other characters. In your books, I would like you to outline all the facts that we find out about Eva. Make a note of that in your books. Remember to pause me, my lovely chat, whilst you do this task, because we're going to come back to it and we're going to reflect upon it. Right, so hopefully you have made a list. And some of the ideas that you could have commented on. You could have said that we know she was pretty. Sheila, Gerald and Eric and the inspector, so 4 characters, all describe her as being pretty. We know that her parents are both dead. We know that she was country bred. That's what Mr. Burling says of her in Act 1. We know that she was working class. And obviously, we know from the inspector that she kept a diary. So hopefully, they were some of the ideas that you outlined. So let's move on to the next slide. This is a timeline of events for Eva Smith. At the end of this, you are going to complete a timeline of events of the plot itself. But to begin with, I would like you to make a note of this timeline in your books. So a timeline of events for Eva Smith, where we started. We started at the beginning of at the end of September, of 1910, when she was employed by Mr. Burling and then sacked following the request for a pay rise. We know that she had 2 months of unemployment, but following that, she worked at Millard's and then was sacked because of Sheila's frustration with her. In 1911, she changed her name to Daisy Renton, and that was when she had the relationship with Gerald. She saw him throughout the summer, and then in the November, she meets Eric. They become lovers. And then in 1912, she is pregnant. She seeks help from Mrs. Burling. Mrs. Burling sends her away. And at the end of March in 1912, she kills herself by drinking strong disinfectant. So I would like you to copy this timeline of events for Eva into your books. You can set it out the way I have, or you can set it out in your own way. It's entirely up to you. But you need to know this. Okay, so whilst you're doing this, obviously press pause. When you've done this, we'll move on to the next slide. Right, so obviously I have said that we are going to complete some analysis today, and we are. But I do want us to look at the idea of Eva Smith a little bit more. So let's consider why we think that Priestley chose the name Eva Smith. So firstly, Eva reminds us of Eve, who was the first woman in the Bible, and Smith, which is a very common English surname. So these 2 names together could suggest that this character, Eva Smith, represents more than one individual. She's meant to represent the whole of the working class across England, and particularly English women. And this is the quote that we are left with, that the inspector leaves us with. So one Eva Smith has gone, but there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us, with their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering and chance of happiness, all intertwined with our lives and what we think and say and do. So the next thing I want you to do, ladies and gents, so we've done quite a few bits and bobs. I would like you to summarise the words of the inspector. So these were words that we looked at on our previous lesson, but as I said, we're doing a little bit of recapping, and I would like you to summarise in no more than 30 words what the inspector is saying here. Link it back to what we found out about the name Eva and the name Smith, and then have some opinion about what you think the inspector's saying. Summarise it. 30 words is all you need. Press pause whilst you do that, and then we'll be in a position to move on to the next slide. Okay, so you're now going to read independently, and we've got quite a lot of pages to do today. It might be that you decide you're going to break this lesson up into two. I don't mind. I haven't quite decided how long I'm going to talk for when I do the analysis, but I want you to press pause while you read pages 63 to 72 or 213 to 220 if you are in 10xb. Okay, so hopefully you've now read those pages, and we are going to do some analysis of them. Remember, my analysis of these pages is quite broad. You need to have your own ideas and your own opinions of what the words and phrases mean, how the audience would have reacted to these words and phrases. And you can do your own research. You can do extra work on this. If you just type "an inspector calls" into YouTube, you will find lots and lots and lots of discussion and analysis about all three of the acts in this play. So we find ourselves at the top of page 63. The inspector has left. Mr. Burling has just phoned the Chief Constable, Colonel Roberts, and they've been told that the inspector does not exist. So we have Mrs. Burling and Mr. Burling now deciding that this makes all the difference. The idea that the inspector was not a real policeman makes a difference to them. But Sheila, with the stage directions bitterly, I suppose we're all nice people now. So it's in some way, she's being sarcastic. It's a kind of irony that she's highlighting. Well, he wasn't real. So actually, everything that they've done doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter because he wasn't real. It means that Mr. and Mrs. Burling have honestly learnt nothing from this experience. And Sheila is bitter about that. She's sad about that because both her and Eric, because he agrees with her, she's right though, they know they've learnt something. They've learnt the idea of responsibility, of social responsibility. But Mr. Burling, he's angry about this, and you'd better keep quiet anyhow. If that had been a police inspector and he'd have heard your confession. So Burling is back to treating his children the same way. It's as if none of this had happened. He's still speaking to Eric like he is that child. And then Sheila brings Gerald into the conversation. You see, Gerald, you haven't to know the rest of our crimes and idiocies. And Gerald says, it's all right, I don't want to know. What do you make of all this business now? Was it a hoax? He's almost cutting Sheila off. He's talking to Mr. Burling because Mr. Burling is the important one. And Gerald and Burling have a conversation. Somebody put that fellow up to coming here and hoaxing us. Burling is trying to convince himself and the family that this was all one big joke. And then kind of berating himself. We ought to have seen through it. In an ordinary way, I believe I would have done. But he blames the celebration. Because of the celebration, I didn't see it. I was played for a fool. And then Mrs. Burling joins in. I wish I'd been here when that man first arrived. I'd have asked him a few questions. So again, we can see that Mr. and Mrs. Burling have forgotten completely about how they were involved in this person's death. And the conversation continues, okay, between Mrs. Burling and Sheila and Mr. Burling. And then we move to the top of page 64, okay. And we use those words again, or Priestley uses those words again, fraud and hoaxed. And Mr. Burling is sure that he's not going to see this as the end of it. So Burling, to Eric and to Gerald, he asks them to sit down, and he makes this speech again now, like he did at the beginning of the play. All right, you're anything but all right, and you needn't stand there as if what? As if you'd nothing to do with us. Just remember your own position, young man. If anybody's up to this neck in this business, you are. So you'd better take some interest in it. So we're back to business again. We're back to keeping things away from the women again. And Eric and Burling and Gerald sit down. But Sheila wants to take an interest. She says, well, it's my interest too. Now listen, you two, you're still feeling on edge. Then at least you can do is keep quiet. Sorry. So again, Mr. Burling is back to talking to his children like children. You need to keep quiet. Children should be seen and not heard. And then kind of we have this back and forth all the time. We have the characters saying a line, then another one interrupts and says another line, and then another. And Mrs. Burling now gets involved. She's quite sharp with Sheila. She tells Sheila she needs to behave sensibly, which is more than you're doing. So again, this idea that they're overwrought, the fact that Sheila and Eric are still children, that they're overwrought, and Eric bursts out. What's the use of talking about behaving sensibly? You're beginning to pretend now that nothing's really happened at all. And I can't see it like that. This girl's still dead, isn't she? Nobody brought her to life, have they? So Eric's pointing out what we as an audience are already seeing, that Mr. and Mrs. Burling don't care. And Eric and Sheila, they do. They are guilty about what happened. And we then go on to say, but whoever the chap was, it doesn't matter who the inspector was. That's not an issue that's up for debate with this family. The fact remains is whether he was real or not, what the Burlings did was important. So we're at the bottom of page 64 now. Eric says, whoever that chap was, the fact remains that I did what I did, and Mother did what she did, and the rest of you did what you did to her. And it's the same rotten story. I want you to think about that repetition of the word did. I want you to think about why Priestley used that repetition there. What is it that he wants us to understand from Eric's lines? And Eric goes on to say, it's still the same rotten story, whether it's been told to a police inspector or somebody else. According to you, I ought to feel a lot better. We're at the top of page 65 now. I stole some money, Gerald. You might as well know. So he now tells the story to Gerald, and he says, I don't feel like sitting down and having a nice talk. Okay, shows how he's feeling. He's still really emotional. He's still really affected by what he did, but actually by what his mother did. And the fact that he still blames his mother. And Sheila agrees, you're absolutely right. So we have Sheila and Eric standing completely apart from the others in this family. Okay. And then Burling, he swears. I mean, the Edwardian version of swearing. Look, for God's sake. And Mrs. Burling protests, Arthur. But he's so damned exasperated. And that's a quote from Mr. Burling. He's frustrated by his children because he is not being able to control his children anymore. They won't try and understand our position. What is that position? That's a position of selfishness. That's a position of arrogance. That's a position of being entitled. And in the middle of page 65, that's what we get from Mr. Burling. Well, my dear, they're just so damned exasperating. They just won't try to understand our position or to see the difference between a lot of stuff like this coming out in private and a downright scandal. So we're back to this scandal. Why is he so worried about the scandal? What is it that he has set his heart on that's going to make him a better class of person? So this is not about what they've done to Eva Smith. This is still about his knighthood and how this scandal will affect him. So we move down the page now, and Eric is shouting. Eric is beside himself. And I say that a girl's dead and we helped kill her. That's all that matters. So a row breaks out between Eric and Mr. Burling. Think about the language that's being used. And again, I don't give a damn now whether I stay here or not from Eric. So Eric is really nailing his colours to the mast. He doesn't want any contact with his family anymore. If they're not going to accept their responsibility, he isn't going to stay there. Okay, and then we move to the bottom of the page because Burling threatens him with the thing that he only thinks will be a threat, which is the money. You've got to pay back the money too. And Sheila says, but it won't bring Eva back. And it doesn't matter because we're back to money. We're back to what's important for Mr. Burling. And we turn over the page now to page 66. And I did say this was quite a long bit of analysis. And please feel free to press pause and go and have a cup of tea. But we're on the page, top of page 66. And Gerald becomes involved now. And Gerald is sorry. But is he? Is he sorry for the relationship that he had with Eva? Or is he sorry that actually he's been caught out? Have a little think about that. I'm sorry. Is he just paying lip service? And then Mr. Burling is back to that point. It wasn't an inspector. And Sheila says, well, he inspected us. So that's another thing to think about. Actually, pretending to be a policeman, pretending to be an inspector, what he did do was inspect the Burlings and Gerald. So that could be something later on that you think about when you write about the inspector. Not just the second part of his name, but the fact that he was an inspector. And Sheila picks up on it. She shows that she's quite a clever girl. He inspected us. And then we move down the page to the middle of the page with Gerald. A man comes here pretending to be a policeman. It's a hoax of some kind. So we're back to the idea of it being a hoax. He's very artful at what he does. He bluffs us into confessing that we've been mixed up with this girl's life in one way or another. And then Eric says, but we have. And then this is the point from Gerald. But how do you know it's the same girl? And we talked about this earlier on. We talked within lessons where we noticed as a class and as classes that the inspector does not show everybody the photograph. He shows some of the characters. He doesn't show them all at the same time, individually, one by one. So we have this in italics as well. So it's something for us said with real gravitas from Gerald, but how do we know it's the same girl? And that's where they begin as a family to start to question it. We all admitted we had something to do with the same girl. And then Gerald, he looks around triumphantly. He's like, he's got it. He's saved their problems as they puzzle this out. Look here, Mr. Burling, you sack a girl called Eva Smith. And this is where we have the timeline that we looked at earlier on. Okay, you sack a girl, you've forgotten about her, shows you a picture, could have been anybody. And then Sheila, he shows you a photograph. Yes, the same photograph, but Gerald's picking piece out of this. How do you know it wasn't a different one that he got out of his pocket? And then we have this conversation with Gerald and Sheila. We've no proof it was the same photograph. Not the slightest proof that Daisy Wenton was Eva Smith. So both Gerald and Mr. Burling in the middle of page 67 are almost egging each other on. We don't know. It wasn't the same photo. We don't know if it's the same girl. He could just be making this up. And all the while, they are making themselves feel better. They are dismissing the responsibilities that have been placed upon them, knowing that they were involved with Daisy/Eva/ a girl that possibly doesn't exist. And then Mrs. Burling joins in. So the three characters who are as equally responsible as Eric and Sheila, the three characters that are doing their utmost to reach out and push this away, Mrs. Burling joins in. She was upset. Eric had left the house, and this man said that if Eric didn't come back, he'd have to go and find him. And she's saying he made me say things. His manner was so severe. And Mrs. Burling, like a fool, I said, yes, I had. So they're trying to comment on how they've been tricked into things. And Mrs. Burling says at the bottom of page 67, feeling so worried, he suddenly turned on me. Do you actually ever think Mrs. Burling feels worried? So we're now on page 68 and we only have a few more pages to go, ladies and gents. Sheila is trying to help her mother, but mother, you don't forget that he showed you a photograph of the girl, that you obviously recognised it. Did anybody else see it? No, he showed it only to me. So again, Gerald is trying to say this is a different photograph. This isn't the same person. And this continues. They are feeling really quite upbeat about the fact that very possibly this is not the same girl. That very possibly they've all been shown a different photograph. I want you to think about this. Does it really matter if each of them had been involved with a different individual in this way? Should they still be feeling responsible? Even if Eva is more than one person, should they still be feeling responsible? So, like I said, we're on page 68. And we've got this conversation. Sheila, Gerald, Mrs. Burling, they're all joining in. They are all starting to make themselves feel better about the fact that this wasn't them. We have Burling. He's back to being eager. And at the page, or at top of page 69, he's triumphant. These are stage directions that Priestley used to describe Burling at the beginning of the play. And we're at the end of the play, and he's back to being eager and triumphant. Where Eric, at the bottom of page 68, is still angry. He understands what he's done. So we have also at the bottom of page 68, what girl? There were probably 4 or 5 different girls. Eric says, that doesn't matter to me. The one I knew is dead. And that's the whole idea. It doesn't matter if this was 1 girl or 5 girls. The result is the same. And Gerald said, that's right, you've got it. How do we know any girl killed herself today? And he's not thinking about what Eric's saying to him. The fact Eric is distraught over this dead girl. Gerald's grabbed something else. He said, well, we don't even know she's dead. And then Burling and Eric and Sheila, we continue with this conversation on page 69. And Burling is more and more excited by the fact that this person doesn't exist, and Gerald decides he's going to take matters into his own hands. And at the end of page 69, he telephones the hospital and he says, "This is the infirmary. This is Gerald Croft of Crofts Limited." He always has to give his name of his company. Why that? Why did he do that? And then we turn to page 70. "One of our employees, a girl, brought in this afternoon, committed suicide, blah, blah, blah." We get the second-hand part of this conversation. "Yes, thank you very much." Puts the phone down. And Gerald is triumphant. "No girl has died in there today. Nobody has been brought in after drinking disinfectant. They haven't had a suicide for months." So, yay! The Burlings and Gerald are triumphant. Again, Burling is triumphant. There you are, no positive proof. He has nothing to be ashamed of. He has nothing to feel guilty about. And we have this conversation at the bottom of page 70. Burling, Gerald, Burling, Mrs. Burling, patting each other on the back. "I'm going to have a drink." They're all smiling now. Gerald has a drink. Burling has a drink. But Sheila has something very poignant to say at the bottom of page 70. "The worst part is, but you're forgetting one thing I still can't forget. Everything we said had happened really happened. If it didn't end in tragedy, then that's lucky for us. But it might have done." So this is Sheila, again reinforcing Priestley's views. It doesn't matter if it's one girl, 5 girls. It doesn't matter if nobody's been taken into the infirmary yet. Sheila says they are still all responsible. And we move to Mr. Burling. He's jovial. Do you remember jovial means that he's happy? But the whole thing's different now. Come, you can see that, can't you? You all helped to kill her. And he's laughing. And he's using the inspector's speech, and he is laughing. He is pointing at Sheila and Eric and laughing. And Sheila moves towards the door, going to bed, a young woman. And Sheila says, "Do you know what? I can't be doing with this. I want to get out of this. It frightens me the way you talk." So what is it specifically that's frightening Sheila? Is it Burling's attitude? Is it Burling's selfishness? Think about what it is that is frightening Sheila. "Nonsense. You'll have a good laugh over this when you a good laugh over it yet. Look, you'd better ask Gerald for that ring back." So we're back to the marriage. It's back to literally round in a big circle. Come on, Sheila, be a good sport. Marry Gerald, because it's going to make me money and it's going to make my business grow. Nothing about what Gerald did and had the affair. Nothing about the way Sheila treated Eva earlier. But Sheila's changed. And she says, "You're pretending everything's just as it was before." And Eric says, "Oh, I'm not." And these are the two characters that stand out. Nothing's the same. Everything has changed. But only Sheila and Eric understand that. And then Mrs. Burling tries to interject. She says, "Why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we carry on behaving as we did?" And Sheila says, "I'll tell you, whoever that inspector was, it was anything but a joke. You knew it then. You began to learn something, and now you've stopped." So Sheila is scolding her parents. She said, "You began to learn something, but you've stopped. You began to learn, but nothing is happening." And then Burling goes back to treating Sheila like a child. Go to bed then. Don't stand there being hysterical. They're overtired." So both Burling and Mrs. Burling are treating their children, who are no longer children, as children. Something we say when children are They're overtired when they're not doing as they're told to do. It's an excuse that's used for children. They're overtired. And Gerald says, "Oh, everything all right now? He's going to get his bit in. Do you want the ring? What about this ring?" And Sheila, she's not hysterical. She's not overtired. She's now in her right mind. "No, not yet. It's too soon, I think." So at the top of page 72. And up until this moment, we know the inspector doesn't exist. We know that no one's been brought into the infirmary. And Burling, now look at the pair of you, the famous younger generation who know it all and they can't even take a joke. He's not trying to build the relationship back between Gerald and Sheila. He's making fun of them. The younger generation, you know everything and you can't even take a joke. And then we have the plot twist. The telephone rings sharply. There's a moment's complete silence. Burling goes to answer it. "Yes?" "Mr. Burling speaking." "What?" "Here." But obviously the other person has rung off. He puts the telephone down slowly and looks in panic-stricken fashion at the others. That was the police. A girl has just died on her way to the infirmary after swallowing some disinfectant, and a police inspector is on his way here to ask some questions. As they stare guiltily, dumbfounded, the curtain falls. So, we have at the end of this, Mr. Burling, quite ironically, ends his speech to Sheila and to Gerald with the idea of not being able to take a joke, and then the telephone rings. And then we have a one-sided conversation. And then we have the words that nobody in this family wanted to hear, that a young lady has died and there's a police inspector. And we are left with those stage directions. They stare guiltily and dumbfounded. Dumbfounded just means confused as the curtain falls. So that's our analysis, ladies and gentlemen, for the end of Act 3. We've got a few more bits and pieces we need to do first of all, though. So let's move on. Okay, so let's have a little reflect. In spite of the facts that we know about Eva, we looked at the facts about Eva. She was pretty, she kept a diary, her parents were dead, and the such like. In Act 3, we begin, and particularly the Burlings begin to have some doubts as to whether Eva really existed or not. There are 3 quotes that show this, okay? So we've no proof it was the same photograph. Mr. Burling is very keen to believe it's not true. And there was no proof, not the slightest proof, that Daisy Renton was Eva Smith. Okay, so these are the way those doubts are borne out between the characters. Okay, so I've split the screen up. We have Mr. and Mrs. Burling on one side, happily accept it. They want to believe that they've been fooled. They're afraid of public scandal and losing position in society. They want everything to go back to normal. Sheila and Eric, they've changed. They can't pretend they have no responsibility. And even if it's true that there's no dead girl, they've learned their lesson from it. So what I want you to do, because I've done quite a lot of analysis, I want you to find quotes. I would suggest you find 2 or 3 quotes from every character to demonstrate how they're feeling. Now, you can do this in your book, and you could do it as a little mind map. So you have Mr. Burling and you find 3 quotes that show how he's feeling. Mrs. Burling, 3 quotes that show how she's feeling, and so on. Or you can just do it in your text. If it was me, I would be doing it in my book. So what I want you to do is press pause whilst you do this. So quotes from the play to demonstrate how each character is feeling right at the end, that part that we've just read. Okay, so page 62 onwards. Press pause whilst you do this, and then we'll carry on. Right, so we are getting right close to the end of this. So as we've said, our ending, we've got an unexpected twist. The story creates a dramatic ending, high tension, high suspense. We are told the characters stare guiltily and are dumbfounded. So I've got a little extension task for those of you that would like to do this. I'd like you to imagine the play continues, and I'd like you to write a short scene to illustrate how each of the characters react to the news. So that's an extension task for you. If you don't want to do that extension task, that's fine by me. There are a couple more slides just for us to finish off. The extension you don't need to do. The next slide you do need to do. Okay. So at the beginning of this lesson, we created a Eva Smith timeline. And we are going to finish off this lesson with creating a plot timeline. So in a similar way to Eva Smith, I now need you to create a timeline for the entire plot. You need to use your copy of An Inspectacles. You need to use the notes you've made in your book along the way. And if needed, your own research on YouTube. So make a plot timeline for me, please. So we've done a lot in this lesson. We've completed our analysis. We've looked at the character of Eva. We've completed a plot timeline. This is the last lesson before the Easter holidays. There will be no lessons during the Easter holidays. Yay! But when we come back after Easter, I'm going to continue with our Inspectacles lessons. We're going to look a little bit more in detail at the themes that run throughout the play, sorry, forgot my words, and also a little bit more in detail at each of the characters. And I need to get you to do some extended writing. Okay, so this is the 6th lesson in our series of Inspectacles lessons before Easter. The 7th will not appear until after the Easter holidays. Okay, thanks for listening, everyone.